The afternoon sun was shining through the wide windows of the local gym. The place was full of energy, with the sound of shoes squeaking on the mat, gloves hitting the punching bags, and laughter filling the air as students practiced their drills. Among the group stood a man everyone admired. He was a black belt, tall and strong, known for his skill in martial arts. His students looked at him with respect, because he had not only mastered techniques but also carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed he could handle anyone who stepped into the ring with him. That day, as the students stretched and sparred with each other, a woman walked in quietly. She didn't wear flashy clothes or gym gear. In fact, she looked like an ordinary visitor who might have been curious to see what was going on inside. Her simple dress and calm expression didn't draw much attention at first. Some students thought she was perhaps waiting for a friend or had just wandered in by mistake. She didn't talk to anyone, only stood near the side, watching carefully. The black belt noticed her after a while. Amused, and perhaps wanting to entertain his students, he raised his voice and called out, "Would you like to try?" He smiled as he said it, half joking, expecting her to wave her hand and refuse. His students laughed, thinking it was just a playful comment. After all, this quiet, simple woman didn't look like she belonged on the training mat. But to everyone's surprise, she nodded. Not a big smile, not a nervous laugh, just a gentle, calm nod that showed she was serious. The gym suddenly became quieter, and a few of the students exchanged puzzled looks. Some whispered among themselves, saying things like, "She probably doesn't know what she's agreeing to," or "This will be over in seconds." The black belt himself chuckled, convinced this was going to be an easy demonstration, maybe even a bit of light-hearted fun. Still, the woman walked toward the mat with steady steps. There was nothing rushed or hesitant about her movement. She slipped off her sandals and stood facing the black belt. Her posture was upright, her shoulders relaxed, and her eyes steady. She didn't look like someone who was frightened or unsure. On the contrary, she seemed completely at ease, as though stepping onto the mat was nothing new for her. The students now grew more curious. Some leaned forward, eager to watch what would happen. Others shook their heads, certain this would be a mismatch. Yet there was something about the woman's calmness that made a few wonder if there was more to her than met the eye. The black belt, meanwhile, treated it lightly. He bowed politely but with a smile that suggested he wasn't taking the match seriously. He thought he would play along for a moment, let her try, and then end it quickly without hurting her. To him, it was just a harmless joke, something that would make his students laugh and also remind them of the difference between a professional fighter and an outsider. But as he looked into her eyes before the sparring began, he noticed something unusual. Most beginners fidget, look around nervously, or show fear when facing someone skilled. This woman did none of that. She looked directly at him, her expression calm, her breathing steady, and her body language balanced. It was the kind of composure he had only seen in people who had trained for years. Still, he pushed that thought aside. Maybe she was just brave, he told himself. Maybe she didn't know what she was getting into. With that, he motioned for the sparring to begin. At that very moment, the atmosphere of the gym shifted. The laughter had died down, replaced by anticipation. The students, who a few minutes earlier were relaxed and joking, were now leaning against the wall or sitting cross-legged on the floor, eager to see how this unusual match would unfold. Some even took out their phones, thinking it would be funny to capture the moment. The woman, however, seemed to ignore the whispers, the stares, and the doubtful smiles. She positioned herself lightly on her feet, her hands raised in a way that didn't look random but instead hinted at someone who had learned discipline. Though she looked like an ordinary woman from outside, there was an unspoken confidence in the way she carried herself. The black belt moved first, not aggressively, but with the playful intention of testing her. He threw a slow, controlled strike, more like a tap than a real attack, expecting her to step back clumsily or freeze. but the reaction he got was not what anyone expected. The woman shifted just enough to avoid his hand, her movement smooth and natural, as if she had done it countless times before. It was subtle, but to those watching closely, it was clear that it wasn't luck. A murmur spread across the room. Students glanced at each other, confused. The black belt, too, raised his eyebrows for a second but quickly covered it with another smile. He told himself it was just coincidence, maybe she had moved by instinct. Yet when he tried again, with a different approach, she once again slipped out of the way effortlessly. The whispers grew louder, and the atmosphere in the gym grew heavier with curiosity. What started as a joke was slowly turning into something much more interesting. The woman hadn't thrown a single strike, yet she had already surprised everyone by standing her ground with such calmness. The black belt, though still smiling, now had a flicker of seriousness in his eyes. It was no longer just a joke. Something about her presence had changed the mood. The students, who had first laughed at the idea of her sparring, were now sitting silently, waiting to see what would come next. The black belt himself began to realize that maybe this was not going to be as easy as he thought. And in that quiet gym, filled with eyes fixed on the mat, the first part of an unforgettable story was about to unfold. The air inside the gym felt heavier now. What had started as a playful joke was slowly turning into something no one had expected. The black belt stood in front of the simple woman, still wearing a half smile, but deep inside he was beginning to wonder. He had expected her to stumble, to laugh nervously, or at least to step back the moment he made his first move. Instead, she had responded with a kind of calm that made him uneasy. The students who had laughed earlier were no longer joking. Their whispers carried doubt and curiosity. Some said, maybe she knows a little, while others tried to brush it off with, she just got lucky. But even those who dismissed it found themselves watching closely. There was something about the way she moved, so controlled and precise, that couldn't be explained by chance alone. The black belt decided to test her again. This time he moved quicker, circling her lightly, making small feints to see how she would react. He wanted to find hesitation, something that would prove she was just an outsider. But to his surprise, she didn't flinch or lose her balance. Every step she took seemed measured, her eyes steady, her breathing calm. She didn't attack, but she didn't look lost either. The silence of the gym made every sound louder: the shuffle of feet, the tap of movement on the mat, and the short breaths of those watching. The woman didn't seem to notice any of it. It was almost as if she was in her own world, completely focused on the person in front of her. Her hands weren't raised in a flashy pose like those who tried to copy martial artists from movies, they were simple, steady, and firm, like someone who knew exactly what to do. For the black belt, this became a challenge to his pride. He had spent years training, teaching, and building a reputation. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a mentor, an example for his students. To be tested by a woman who had walked in looking so ordinary felt almost unbelievable. And yet, the longer he sparred with her, the more he realized she wasn't to be underestimated. He tried a light kick, swift enough to see if she could keep up. Instantly, she shifted, her body moving with surprising speed. She didn't block with force but rather angled herself so the kick missed by inches. The move was subtle, but it showed experience. A few of the students gasped softly. One of them muttered, "Did you see that?" Another shook his head in disbelief. The black belt narrowed his eyes. He began to realize that this was not just about skill anymore, it was about respect. If he continued to treat it like a joke, he would only embarrass himself further. At the same time, he didn't want to go full force against her. There was a balance he needed to find, but it was clear that the woman had already shifted the mood of the entire gym. As they moved around each other, a strange tension filled the room. The woman didn't try to attack first. She simply reacted, and yet her reactions were so precise that it looked like she was leading the rhythm of the spar. Her calmness was unnerving. It was not the calmness of someone who didn't know what was happening, but of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The black belt decided to increase the pace. He began to move faster, testing combinations, mixing his strikes with small tricks he often used on beginners. He wanted to see her limits. Each time, she managed to avoid or deflect without breaking her composure. She didn't overpower him, but she made him work harder than he had planned. The students were no longer smiling. Their eyes followed every movement, some leaning forward as if afraid to miss a detail. One young student whispered, "She moves better than most of us." Another added, "But how? Who is she?" The black belt himself was asking the same question in his mind. Who was she really? How could someone who looked so simple, so ordinary, carry such skill without anyone knowing? He began to suspect that she had a background in martial arts, but if she did, why had no one heard of her before? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was becoming less about showing off and more about uncovering the truth. Each movement she made told a story of discipline, patience, and years of practice. It was impossible to fake the kind of balance and control she displayed. Still, pride pushed him forward. He wasn't ready to admit defeat in front of his students. He wanted to push her, to see how far she could go, and maybe finally catch her off guard. He began using techniques he usually saved for more advanced sparring partners, small bursts of speed, feints that tricked even skilled fighters. And yet, she adapted. She didn't counter aggressively, but every time, she managed to keep herself safe, her body flowing like water around his strikes. The whispers grew louder now, filling the gym with nervous energy. Some students even pulled out their phones again, but this time it wasn't to laugh, it was to record something they knew they might never see again. What started as a joke had turned into a real test of skill, and the simple woman was passing that test in a way no one had expected. For the woman, nothing seemed out of place. She didn't show any signs of fear or overconfidence. She simply moved with grace, like someone who had practiced the same motions thousands of times until they became part of her. She didn't need to show off, her silence and her calmness were enough to speak for her. The black belt, now sweating lightly, realized that the room had fallen completely quiet except for their movements. Everyone was waiting, breath held, to see what would happen next. And he knew that whatever the outcome, this moment was already unforgettable. What had begun as a harmless invitation had become a serious test. And though he was the one wearing the black belt, it was the simple woman who had made the entire gym rethink what it meant to judge someone by their appearance. The fight wasn't finished yet. But one thing was already clear: the respect of the room was slowly shifting. The woman had not needed words, flashy moves, or any kind of introduction. Her skill spoke louder than anything else. And for the first time that day, the black belt himself felt that he might not be the only master in the room. The atmosphere inside the gym had completely changed. At first, people thought it would be nothing more than a quick joke, a playful sparring match that would end in seconds. But now, no one was laughing. Every eye in the room was fixed on the mat, watching the unusual pair face each other. The black belt stood with a more serious expression than before, and the woman, calm and steady, looked as if nothing around her could disturb her focus. The black belt knew he had to prove himself now. His pride and reputation were on the line. He had been teaching for years, showing his students discipline, strength, and technique. To be challenged by someone who appeared ordinary was not something he had ever imagined. And yet, here he was, facing a woman who had already shown surprising control. He adjusted his stance, preparing to raise the intensity. The woman didn't move first. She simply stood in her balanced posture, eyes steady, breathing even, as if she had all the time in the world. There was no rush in her body, no nervous shake in her hands. She looked like someone waiting for the right moment. That calmness made the students whisper to each other. One of them muttered, "She's not even nervous," and another replied, "It feels like she's been here before." The black belt stepped in with his first serious strike. It wasn't meant to hurt, but it carried more speed and power than before. The woman shifted gracefully, her body turning just enough to avoid the blow. Instead of stepping back in fear, she remained close, balanced, and ready. The movement was so smooth that it almost looked like a dance, practiced and precise. Gasps filled the gym. The students could hardly believe what they were seeing. This wasn't luck. This wasn't guessing. This was skill, clear and undeniable. The black belt frowned slightly, though not in anger, more in recognition. He had faced trained fighters before, and he knew the difference between instinct and training. What she had just done was no accident. He tried again, this time changing his rhythm, adding small feints to confuse her. But each time, she read his moves as if she could see them before they came. She didn't counter right away, she allowed him to show his strength, then flowed around it. Her timing was sharp, her balance unshaken. The room was silent except for the sound of their feet brushing against the mat and the sharp breaths they took between movements. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the moment something dramatic would happen. And then it came. The black belt launched a quick combination, moving in with speed, expecting her to step back. Instead, she did the opposite. She leaned in slightly, sidestepped his main strike, and with one controlled movement, she tapped his arm away and created an opening. For the first time, she threw a strike not strong, not harmful, but clean and precise. Her fist stopped just short of his chest, close enough that everyone knew she could have landed it if she wanted to. The gym erupted in whispers and shocked exclamations. The black belt froze for a second, then stepped back with a small nod. That moment alone told everyone watching that she wasn't an outsider. She had training. She had discipline. She had experience. Now it was no longer about a joke or even pride. It was about respect. The black belt straightened, no longer smiling. He bowed to her slightly, and this time it wasn't playful, it was sincere. She returned the bow with the same calmness, and the spar continued. The black belt tested her again, this time with even faster moves. He wanted to see the limit of her ability, but she kept matching him with patience and precision. She wasn't trying to overpower him. Instead, she used his energy against him, redirecting it with gentle but effective movements. Every time he tried to corner her, she slipped away. Every time he tried to trick her, she stayed balanced. The students were in awe. Some of them whispered things like, "She's better than us," and, "How did she learn all this?" Others simply stayed silent, eyes wide, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Finally, the black belt grew impatient. Not out of anger, but out of determination. He wanted to test her fully. He moved with greater force, putting in the kind of speed he would normally use against an advanced student. His body spun, his strikes came faster, his steps sharper. For a moment, it seemed like he would finally corner her. But then, with perfect timing, she turned her body, caught his momentum, and with a swift motion, swept his leg just enough to off-balance him. Before anyone could even process what had happened, the black belt was on the ground. The gym went silent. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped. The black belt lay there for a moment, stunned. He hadn't expected it. He had thought she might surprise him, but not like this. The woman stepped back respectfully, not celebrating, not mocking. She simply waited, calm as ever, giving him the chance to get up. Slowly, he rose to his feet. His face was serious, but there was no anger in his eyes. Instead, there was respect, deep, undeniable respect. He bowed to her again, this time lower, acknowledging what she had just shown. The students followed his example, some bowing quietly in admiration of the simple woman who had just silenced the whole gym. The black belt smiled faintly, not in amusement but in genuine appreciation. "You are no beginner," he said softly, his voice carrying across the quiet gym. The woman only smiled gently and replied with a calm tone, "Training is not about showing off. It's about discipline." Her words struck the students deeply. Many of them had entered the gym hoping to become strong, to show off their skills, or to prove something to others. But in that moment, they realized that true mastery was not about loud displays or flashy movements. It was about quiet control, patience, and humility. The spar was over, but its memory would stay with everyone present. They had come expecting a small joke, a light moment of fun. Instead, they had witnessed something unforgettable. The black belt himself had been humbled, not by force, but by the quiet strength of a woman who carried her skill without ever needing to boast. The students talked about it long after the match ended. Some were inspired to train harder, others began to understand the true meaning of respect. And the black belt, though surprised and humbled, felt grateful. He had been reminded that no matter how high you climb, there is always someone out there with something to teach you. As for the woman, she left the gym as quietly as she had entered. She didn't stay for praise or recognition. She didn't explain her past or talk about her training. She simply bowed politely, put on her sandals, and walked out the door with the same calm steps. The room stayed silent for a long moment after she left. Then, slowly, one of the students said, "I'll never forget this day." And none of them ever did. The silence after the sparring session was heavier than anything the gym had felt before. Students who usually joked and laughed between rounds were now speechless. They had witnessed something they never expected. Their black belt instructor, the man who had guided them for years, had been outmatched not through force or aggression, but with calm precision and discipline. The simple woman who had walked in quietly was no longer just a visitor in their eyes. She had shown a skill that left even the most experienced fighters stunned. The black belt stood upright again, brushing the dust from his uniform. He wasn't angry. Instead, his eyes carried a thoughtful respect. For him, martial arts had always been about discipline, but even he had sometimes slipped into pride. Facing this woman reminded him of a lesson he had once learned but nearly forgotten: there is always someone who knows more, someone who trains harder in silence. He looked at her and gave a deep bow, one that came not from formality but from genuine admiration. The students followed, bowing too. It wasn't just tradition, it was an instinctive response to what they had just seen. Many of them had entered the gym to build strength and confidence, but in that moment, they understood that true strength wasn't in showing off. It was in controlling your power, in knowing when to use it and when not to. The woman accepted their respect with quiet grace. She didn't smile widely or raise her chin in pride. She simply returned the bow, her expression calm and humble. It was clear she hadn't stepped onto the mat to embarrass anyone or to prove a point. She had only responded to a challenge, and in doing so, she had taught a lesson without speaking many words. After the spar, the black belt approached her. His voice was calm but curious. "You've trained before," he said, more as a statement than a question. The woman nodded gently. "I trained when I was younger," she admitted. "Life took me away from it for some years, but the discipline never leaves you." Her answer struck him deeply. He realized she wasn't chasing recognition. She wasn't there to compete or show off. She was someone who had carried her training silently, without ever needing to display it. That kind of dedication, the kind that doesn't demand attention, was rare. The students listened carefully, some looking at her with admiration, others with inspiration. They whispered among themselves, saying things like, "She's stronger than she looks, and she doesn't even need to prove it." Her presence had already become a story they knew they would tell others for years. The black belt asked her to share a little more, not for himself, but for the benefit of his students. She agreed, but she didn't give long speeches. Instead, she spoke in short, simple sentences. "Strength is not about who you can beat," she said. "It is about who you can control yourself first. When you can stay calm in front of any opponent, you have already won half the battle." Her words echoed through the gym like a quiet bell. They were simple, but powerful. The students nodded slowly, realizing the truth in them. Many of them had struggled with fear, frustration, or impatience during training. To hear that self-control was more important than overpowering others gave them a new perspective. The black belt, still thoughtful, decided to spar with her one more time, but this time, not as a test or a joke, but as a genuine exchange of learning. He invited her back onto the mat, bowing respectfully. She agreed, stepping forward again with the same calmness as before. The students watched eagerly, but this time their eyes were not filled with doubt or laughter, they were filled with respect and curiosity. The second spar was different. The black belt moved with seriousness, not underestimating her anymore. He brought out techniques that showed his years of training, but the woman responded with equal control. Their movements became sharper, their rhythm quicker. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like a fight, but to those who understood, it was a dance of discipline. Each strike, each step, each defense carried meaning. At one point, the black belt managed to corner her slightly, forcing her to react faster. But even then, she didn't panic. Instead, she found an opening and slipped away smoothly, regaining balance without wasting energy. The students clapped softly, amazed at the level of skill they were witnessing. Then came the moment that silenced the gym completely. The black belt launched a rapid combination of moves, testing her reflexes. She responded perfectly, dodging and redirecting. And just when he thought he had her cornered again, she executed a flawless technique, a takedown that was not aggressive but precise. In one swift motion, she lowered her center of gravity, used his momentum against him, and placed him on the mat once more. The room erupted with gasps. The black belt, however, didn't feel embarrassed. Instead, he smiled for the first time since the spar began, a real smile, filled with admiration. He got up quickly and clapped his hands together in respect. "That was beautiful," he said. The students joined in, applauding loudly, their earlier doubts replaced with awe. They weren't just cheering for the woman, they were cheering for the lesson they had all learned that day. The woman bowed once more and stepped back. Her expression hadn't changed, still calm, still composed. She didn't bask in the applause or take pride in defeating their teacher. To her, it was never about winning or losing. It was about practicing with discipline, respecting the art, and carrying humility along with skill. The black belt addressed his students afterward. His voice carried a tone they hadn't heard before, gentle, reflective, and sincere. "Today," he said, "you have all learned something important. Strength is not measured by the belt you wear or the title you hold. It is measured by how you use what you know, how you respect others, and how you remain humble even when you can win." This woman has reminded us of what true martial arts really means. His words touched the students deeply. Some of them lowered their heads, thinking about their own attitudes in training. Others looked at the woman with admiration, realizing they had just witnessed something rare. The woman didn't stay much longer. She thanked the instructor for allowing her to spar and prepared to leave. But before she walked out, she turned to the students and said one last thing: never underestimate anyone, not even yourself. You never know what strength is hidden until it is tested. With that, she left the gym, her quiet footsteps fading into the evening air. The students remained still for a while, processing everything they had seen and heard. The black belt stood silently, his eyes thoughtful. He knew this day would stay in his memory forever. From that day on, the gym was different. The students trained harder, but they also trained with more humility. They stopped underestimating new learners and instead offered encouragement. The black belt himself became more patient, more open, and more respectful toward every person who walked into his gym. The story of the simple woman spread quickly. Those who had been there told it to others, and soon it became a tale everyone wanted to hear. Some thought it was just a rumor, but those who had seen it with their own eyes knew the truth. They had been there when a woman, underestimated by everyone, taught an unforgettable lesson that silenced the whole gym. The days after the sparring match felt different inside the gym. The students who once laughed at newcomers or underestimated anyone who looked ordinary now carried a new sense of respect in their training. That single moment when the simple woman had walked in, sparred with their teacher, and left quietly had changed the way they thought about martial arts, about strength, and even about life. The black belt, who had been teaching them for years, spoke less about winning and more about discipline. He reminded them of what they had seen, that calmness could defeat pride, and quiet strength could outshine loud confidence. The memory of the woman's composure remained fresh in their minds. Whenever someone grew impatient or frustrated during practice, the instructor would only say, "Remember the lesson," and immediately, silence would return to the room. Everyone knew what he meant. The students often whispered about her when class was over. Some asked, "Do you think she was a professional fighter?" Others wondered, "Why hasn't anyone heard of her before?" There was mystery surrounding her, but the truth was simple: she didn't need recognition. She had left no name behind, only a story. And that story was enough. Weeks turned into months, and still the memory of that day stayed alive. The students trained harder, with more seriousness than before. They no longer mocked or underestimated anyone who entered the gym. When a new student arrived, someone who was shy, nervous, or unsure, the others greeted them with encouragement instead of laughter. The woman's example had shown them that greatness could hide behind the quietest faces. The black belt, too, had changed. He had always been respected, but now he became more humble. He admitted openly to his students that the woman had taught him something valuable. "I thought I was teaching her," he told them once, "but she was the one who reminded me of the true meaning of this art." Those words surprised his students. To hear their teacher admit that he had been humbled was powerful. It showed them that even masters are still learners. The story of that spar traveled beyond the gym. Other trainers heard about it, other students from different gyms came to ask if it was true. Each time, the black belt confirmed it without hesitation. He didn't feel ashamed. Instead, he felt grateful. "It was one of the greatest lessons of my life," he would say. "A lesson I could never have taught myself." The woman never returned to the gym, but her absence only made her memory stronger. To the students, she became almost like a legend. They didn't remember her for flashy moves or a dramatic victory. They remembered her for her calmness, her humility, and the way she showed respect even when she proved herself stronger. For many of the younger students, her story became a source of motivation. Some said, "If she can do it, maybe I can too." Others said, "I want to train so that one day I can be as calm as her." She had become an example of what true martial arts spirit looked like, and that example guided them every day in their practice. One evening, after a long day of training, the black belt gathered his students and spoke again about what had happened. He told them that martial arts was not about the belt, the uniform, or the applause of others. It was about carrying discipline into everyday life. "You may never fight in a ring or spar in front of a crowd," he said. "But you will face challenges, difficulties, and people who underestimate you. In those moments, remember her. Remember how she stood calmly, without fear, without pride. That is the real victory." The students nodded, their eyes filled with understanding. For the first time, they truly grasped that martial arts was not just about techniques. It was about character. It was about the kind of person you become through training. The story also touched people outside the gym. Friends of the students heard about it. Parents, relatives, and even strangers were told the tale. Everyone found something inspiring in it. Some saw it as a story of humility, others as a reminder not to judge by appearances. It carried different lessons for different people, but all agreed that it was unforgettable. For the black belt, the memory became deeply personal. Sometimes, when he stood alone in the quiet gym, he thought about that day. He remembered the woman's calm eyes, the way she moved without hesitation, the way she bowed respectfully even after showing her skill. He realized that the true spirit of martial arts is not in proving you are stronger than others, but in carrying yourself with dignity and control, no matter who stands in front of you. He also realized that perhaps the woman had walked into the gym for a reason. Maybe it was chance, maybe it was fate, but in his heart, he believed she was meant to remind him of something he had forgotten. For years, he had been proud of his belt, his teaching, his reputation. But she had shown him that titles mean nothing if you lose the heart of the art. The students never forgot either. Even years later, they spoke about that day as if it had happened yesterday. "Do you remember the woman who silenced the whole gym?" they would ask each other. And every time, the answer was the same: "Yes, we'll never forget her." The gym itself carried her spirit forward. New students who joined were told the story during their early days. It became a tradition, almost like a lesson passed down. "Once, a simple woman came here," the older students would say, "and she taught us more in one afternoon than we had learned in years." In time, the Black Belts Gym became known not just for its training but for its atmosphere of respect and humility. Visitors noticed it. They said the students were disciplined, focused, and encouraging. They didn't laugh at mistakes, they didn't underestimate newcomers, and they didn't train just for pride. The lesson of that woman lived in every part of the gym, shaping its culture. Though the woman herself remained a mystery, her presence lingered in the memories of those who had seen her. They didn't need to know her name or her past. What mattered was the impression she had left, the reminder that true strength is quiet, humble, and disciplined. And so, the story ended not with a loud victory or a public celebration, but with a silent lesson that changed lives. The woman walked in as a stranger and left as a teacher, without ever claiming the title. The black belt, once so confident in his skill, bowed to her with respect that day, and his students followed. What happened inside that gym remained a moment frozen in time. A black belt had invited a simple woman to spar as a joke, but what she showed silenced everyone. The laughter stopped, the whispers faded, and in their place grew admiration, respect, and humility. It was not just a story about a fight. It was a story about how appearances deceive, how humility triumphs over pride, and how true mastery is carried in silence. For those who were there, it became one of the greatest lessons of their lives, a reminder that strength is not in defeating others, but in mastering yourself. And long after that day, the gym still carried her lesson, as if the echo of her calm footsteps remained on the mat forever.